Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing how to solve a mixture word problem. So let's begin with this problem. Suppose there were two sprinklers. The first sprinkler was used for 40 hours and the second was used for 25 hours. There was a combined output of 2,400 gallons of water. What was the water output rate for each sprinkler if the sum of the two rates was 75 gallons per hour? So a couple things is you'll notice that there are several numbers used in this problem, but each one is kind of a different type. For example, you'll see that we've got 40 hours and 25 hours here. We've got another number here, but that is gallons, and then we have another guy over here, which is actually gallons per hour. So the question is, how do those three units relate to each other? Well, let's begin with a pretend situation. So suppose that for whatever reason you decided to run your sprinkler for 10 hours. And for each hour that you run your sprinkler, we know that it's going to pump out 5 gallons of water. The question is, how could we figure out how much total water you've used over that 10 hours? Well, if I know that for each hour my sprinkler is pumping out 5 gallons of water, then to figure out how many gallons my sprinkler is pumping out in 10 hours, I'm just going to multiply those numbers together. And that would give me 50 gallons of water. So this is going to be the formula that we're going to be using. If I take the number of hours and I multiply that by the number of gallons per hour, which is, by the way, called a rate, that should tell me how many gallons of water that we're using. So you'll notice that in this problem, it mentions that I have two sprinklers. So I'm going to organize my information in a table. So I've got sprinkler 1, I've got sprinkler 2, and then I'm going to have also a combined row where I'm going to put any information that pertains to both sprinkler 1 and sprinkler 2. Now I'm just going to make a table, and I'm going to try to fill in the details that are provided in the problem. So in this case, they tell me that there were two sprinklers. They said that the first sprinkler was used for 40 hours. The second one was used for 25 hours, so I can fill those in. So the first sprinkler was used for 40 hours, second one for 25 hours. They tell me that there was a total combined output of 2,400 gallons, so that's going to go under my gallons column. So that's the total combined output, so that's going to go in my combined row. And then the other number they give me, the only other number they give me, is they tell me that the sum of the two rates was 75 gallons per hour. So that number is going to go, again, in my combined row under gallons per hour. Okay, so what am I looking for in this problem? Well, what it's asking for is, it says, what was the water output rate for each sprinkler? So what I'm looking for is, what's the water output rate for sprinkler 1 and what's the water output rate for sprinkler 2? Since we don't know either one of those, I'm just going to call those X and Y. So the water output rate for sprinkler 1 is what we're going to call X. The water output rate for sprinkler 2 is what we're going to call Y. So then I want to come up with an expression for the number of gallons that sprinkler 1 is pumping out. Well, I know that sprinkler 1 is running for 40 hours, and it's pumping out X gallons per hour. So an expression for the total amount of water that it's pumping out is going to be 40 times whatever X is. Similarly, the total amount of water that sprinkler 2 is pumping out is going to be 25 times whatever Y is. Now here's what I know. I know that if I look at the total output rate of both of them, what the problem told me was that the sum of the two rates was 75. In other words, sprinkler 1's gallons per hour plus sprinkler 2's gallons per hour has to equal 75. So these two guys have to add up to equal 75. Similarly, when I look at the 2,400 gallons of water, well, those 2,400 gallons of water had to come from somewhere. Specifically, they had to come from sprinkler 1 plus sprinkler 2. In other words, the amount of water that sprinkler 1 is generating plus the amount of water that sprinkler 2 is generating has to equal 2,400 gallons. So these two guys have to add together to equal 2,400. So now I've got two variables and two equations. So the first equation is x plus y equals 75. The second equation is 40x plus 25y equals 2,400. Now I just want to solve this system of equations. So there's several ways we could do this. I'm actually going to use the substitution method. So I'm going to take this first equation and solve it for x. So I'm just going to subtract y from both sides. That gives me x equals 75 minus y. And then I'm going to take that 75 minus y, and I'm going to plug that in for x in the second equation. So if I do that, I get 40 times 75 minus y plus 25y equals 2,400. Distribute the 40. That gives me 3,000 minus 40y plus 25y equals 2,400. Notice that equation only has one variable. So combine my y's, that gives me 3,000 minus 15y equals 2,400. Subtract 3,000 from both sides. That gives me negative 15y equals negative 600. Divide by negative 15. Gives me y equals 40. So now I'm half done because I was trying to figure out what both x and y were. So I figured out what y is. To find x, I'm just going to take my y value and plug it back in for y over here. So I know that x is equal to 75 minus y. So here we go. I know that x is going to be 75 minus 40. So x is 35. So what we just found out is that sprinkler 1's rate is 35 gallons per hour, and sprinkler 2's rate is 40 gallons per hour. Here's another problem for you to try. Pause the video and then restart after you've given it a shot. Okay, so for this one, notice that they're giving us dollars per hour. That's one kind of unit, dollars per hour. Total dollars and hours. So the question is, how do those things relate to each other? Well, again, if I told you that you made $20 per hour and you worked for 10 hours, the way that we could figure out the total amount of dollars that you made would be to multiply those two guys together. So that would give us, in this case, $200. So the equation that we're going to be using is going to be dollars per hour times hours equals dollars. And now, just like before, we're going to make a table to organize our information. So we've got mechanic 1, mechanic 2, and then a combined row. And then we're just going to make a table, and we're going to try to fill in the details. So we know that the first mechanic, it says charged $45 per hour. Second was $50 per hour. We know that they worked for a total of 15 hours, and the total bill was $700. So we put those into the table. Total of 15 hours, total bill of $700. Again, what we're looking for is how long each mechanic worked. So I don't know how long mechanic 1 worked, so I'm going to call him X. I don't know how long mechanic 2 works, so I'm going to call that y. So an expression for the amount of money that mechanic 1 earned, or made, I should say, for those x hours would be 45 times whatever x is. Similarly, mechanic 2, if he's working for $50 per hour for y hours, the total amount of money that he made and would charge would be 50 times whatever y is. So now, just like before, I know that these two guys have to add up to be 15, and these two guys have to add up to equal 700. So now we've got our two equations. And we've got two variables, so we have a system. And now we just want to solve that system. So if we take this first one, subtract y from both sides, that gives us x equals 15 minus y. And then we're going to plug that 15 minus y in for x in the second equation. That gives us 45 times 15 minus y plus 50y equals 700. Distribute through, so 45 times 15 is 675 minus 45y plus 50y equals 700. Combine like terms gives us 675 plus 5y equals 700. Subtract 675 from both sides gives us 5y equals 25. Divide both sides by 5 gives us y equals 5. So that's part of our solution. And then I'm just going to take that value and plug it in back here to find the x value. So if we do that, we get x equals 15 minus 5, which means that x equals 10, and those are my two solutions. So the first mechanic worked for 10 hours, the second mechanic worked for 5 hours.